They told us to burn these records. The pyres were stacked high, and the Lord's decree was absolute. Let none remember the Abysswalker's shame. Yet the black wax cylinders were never given to the flame. Instead, they were brought here, to the bottommost tier of the Royal Archive, where the air is thick with candle soot and centuries of unturned pages. I am one of only 3 remaining scribes licensed to break their seals. And I break this one knowing that ink may carry sickness. The first scroll is brittle, its vellum sweating a faint black condensation that clings to my fingertips. That is the first impossibility. Parchment should not rot when kept in dry stone vaults. And yet, as I unroll it, I smell something that has no place here. The odor of waterlogged earth, as though the script had been dragged through a marsh that no longer exists. The script begins not in triumph, but in lamentation. Artorias did not die a hero. He drowned while still breathing, in something deeper than water. That line appears 3 times, in 3 different hands. The last version is written in a jagged script that bites through the page, as though the scribe's hand had been seized mid-letter. Before the abyss consumed him, Artorias was the greatest among the Lord's champions, one of the 4 knights sworn to Lord Gwyn, peerless with the great sword, swift beyond mortal measure, and armored in silver that caught the sun like a blade. To the people, he was more than a man. He was a bulwark against the encroaching dark. But the dark is patient. The old records speak in measured military prose, supply manifests, deployment rosters, weather logs from his campaigns. It is in the margins, in the offhand notes, that the shape of the truth begins to show. The earliest mention of the corruption is not in Ulas Quail, as the official histories claim, but in the deep forest beyond the royal wood. A hunter reports a stillness without origin, where even the wind ceased for hours at a time. Game wandered into the clearing, and lay down, not dead, but unwilling to rise. The Lord's scouts marked the place, and reported back. It was Artorias who insisted on going himself. The scrolls tell of a solitary ride, no heraldry, no procession, only the knight and a grey wolf pacing at his stirrup. The wolf was not named in these earliest records, though later all would know it as Sif. They crossed the wood and vanished for 3 days. When Artorias returned, his armor was scratched with fine, precise cuts, too narrow for blades, too deep for claws. He would not say what had done it. From that day onward, the scent of marsh clung faintly to him, even in the heights of Anor Londo, where no such soil had ever lain. I pause here in my reading, for something has shifted in the air. The candles sputter as if a door had opened. But this chamber has no doors, save the one I sealed behind me. No matter, I will continue. Artorias's glory was unbroken for decades afterward, or so it was made to seem. The annals list his victories against the everlasting dragon's remnants, his escort of the Lord's own children across half the realm, his duels with enemies whose names have been stricken from memory. And yet, each victory record is shorter than the last. The precise notes, troop strengths, terrain sketches give way to vaguer descriptions. The enemy was routed, no further details required. It is as if his deeds became something unfit for the parchment. One detail recurs, though it does not belong to the battles themselves. It is a phrase recorded in 3 separate campaigns, uttered by the knight at the height of battle. The abyss will not cross a knight's will. It is said to have steadied entire formations under withering assault. But the handwriting that records this phrase in the later scrolls shakes, and the ink is smudged as if the scribe's hand had trembled. I run my own hand over those words, and the ink comes away wet. Fresh. This should not be. Something shifts again in the darkness at my back. A sound too low for true hearing, more a pressure in the ribs. It is gone as quickly as it came. The scroll ends with no conclusion, only a torn edge. I set it aside and reach for the next cylinder, its wax seal black and soft, as though it had only just cooled from the flame. It bears no royal crest, only the impression of a paw. The black wax seal bears the unmistakable impression of a wolf's paw. But this is no ordinary beast. The ink on the scroll inside is almost liquid, and the parchment hums faintly, with a resonance I can only describe as unnatural. The bond between Artorias and the great grey wolf, later named Sif, is well known to many as legend. But here, in these forbidden annals, the truth feels darker and far more intricate than simple companionship. This account begins at the edge of the great wood, where the underbrush whispers secrets older than kingdoms. Artorias is described mounting a lithe, grey wolf with eyes like shards of fractured moonlight. The scribe's words are reverent, bordering on liturgical. And the knight took the beast as his brother in arms, for in the abyss, the loneliness of man is the greatest foe. What follows is an array of tactical reports, interspersed with coded notations referencing Unit Alpha and Companion Sync Protocol. The language mixes battlefield jargon with something more archaic, almost ceremonial. Sif was more than a mount or guard beast. The records suggest a ritual pact, sealed not in blood, but in shared shadow. The chronicler's notes describe the wolf's movements as flowing and deliberate, akin to a sacred dance, a fog shifting on the edges of the world, invisible yet ever present. Oddly, the earliest sketches of Sif do not depict a wolf, but a creature with unsettlingly human eyes that seem to watch through the observer, not at them. The presence of this pact changes the entire calculus of Artorias' mission. The knight was not alone. His bond to Sif was a living talisman against the encroaching abyss. And yet, even this bond would fray under pressure. Small details in the scroll jar the mind. A report from the first skirmish near Ula Sile mentions whispered howls heard inside the lines, though no enemy was visible. Another entry notes a synchrony failure in the wolf's gait, like the creature's steps, momentarily no longer aligned with the knight's heartbeat. I close the scroll briefly, the weight of this unnatural union pressing down on me like an iron shackle. From the recesses of the archive, I hear it again. That low, guttural growl just beneath the edge of hearing. The hairs on my neck rise, yet when I glance to the shadowed corner where the sound seems to stir, there is nothing. Yet the scent of damp earth lingers, stronger now than before, like a forest floor after a summer rain. But this chamber has no forest. I open the scroll again, forced by a compulsion I do not understand. The text shifts. Not in content, but in perception. Lines once thought poetic now strike as warnings, warnings encoded in ritual phrasing. Let no man sever the bond of wolf and knight, lest the abyss see weakness where there should be strength. This phrase becomes a motif, a litany repeated in margins and footnotes, almost a prayer. I trace my fingertip across the ink, and a jolt runs through my arm. A cold spark, like the kiss of an unseen frost. The document recounts the ritual itself. A night beneath a bleeding moon, where Artorias and the wolf exchanged a portion of their essence. The chronicler's hand trembles as it describes the ceremony's final words, a whispered oath in a language forgotten by all but the oldest priests. "Until the abyss is sealed, my soul shall guard your steps as your blade guards mine." A bond forged in twilight and shadow, a tether against the slow corruption seeping through Ulakil's roots. This bond was sacred, inviolate, until it was broken. The closing lines of the scroll speak of the wolf's departure, sent away by Artorias with a final command. The wolf was to wait, to guard something buried in the dark, something that even the night feared to confront alone. And here, at this word, the growl rises once more. Louder now, resonating through the chamber's stone like a warning. My breath quickens. The candlelight flickers violently, casting the walls into sudden, leaping darkness. I know then that the wolf's presence is not confined to these pages or to history. Sif lingers still, a shadow in the archive's heart, watching, waiting. I shut the scroll abruptly. The wax seal melts slightly beneath my palm, as if the pact itself were awakening. I do not know what awaits in the chapters to come. Only that the bond of knight and wolf is not merely legend, but a living thread pulling me deeper into a darkness I cannot yet comprehend. Ulakil was a kingdom unlike any other. Its walls gleamed with stones carved from the purest moonlight, and its gardens were said to sing with the magic of the ancients. Here, the people danced on the edge of light and shadow, masters of sorcery and guardians of secrets older than the age of fire. Yet the greatest secret was one they dared not speak aloud. The abyss was not merely a force of destruction. It was a sickness born of pain, and it could be healed. The impossible fact, recorded in a now fractured manuscript, is this. Ulatzil did not awaken the abyss by accident. They reached for it. A ritual born of hope and desperation, an attempt to cleanse the darkness with light. The chronicler's hand falters as I transcribe these words. The ritual was conducted beneath the earth, far below the shining towers, in catacombs long forgotten. Sacred litanies were sung in the tongue of stars, an ancient dialect said to bind spirits and flesh alike. The record tells of gardens blooming black, of flowers that bled shadows instead of nectar. Trees with bark like cracked bone stretched toward an empyrean sun unseen by mortal eyes. The air itself thickened with humidity, so dense it pressed upon the skin like a living thing. In the days following the ritual, tremors rippled not through stone, but through the marrow of those who dwelled near the catacombs. Hearts skipped beats, memories faltered, and a pall of silence spread where song had once thrived. An entry penned in hurried, shaky script describes a stillness without origin, a place where neither wind nor voice could penetrate, where even the sound of breathing seemed swallowed whole. It was here, in this unnatural void, that the abyss first clawed its way into Ulakil's veins. The chronicler records an eyewitness account, a sorcerer who dared approach the threshold. His description is fragmented. The darkness was not absence, but presence. It moved like a living sea, folding and unfolding, with no beginning or end. I heard whispers not spoken, voices not sung, but breathed from the void between stars. Time fractured. Minutes stretched into eternity, and the sorcerer's shadow peeled from his body, writhing like a serpentine wraith before vanishing into the depths. This was the first cry of the abyss. A wound in the world, bleeding black light. The The kingdom's sages convened in desperate council, their robes heavy with dust and dread. They agreed to seal the catacombs, to lock away the darkness beneath stone and silence. Yet the chronicler's notes suggest they underestimated the scope of the corruption. The final report speaks of trees uprooting themselves to wander the streets, of creatures twisted in bone and sinew wandering aimlessly, neither dead nor alive. Most chillingly, the chronicler's own margin notes bear a warning, written in cipher. The abyss answers not to commands, but to longing. A faint wind stirs the candle flames as I write this, though the chamber remains sealed and still. The scent of damp earth is stronger now. A reminder that the darkness once contained beneath Ulakilus may yet seep through the cracks of stone and time. I close the manuscript and lean back, feeling the weight of centuries pressing down, and hear, once more, a low growl from the shadows. It is no longer faint, no longer uncertain. It is a summons. The royal summons came not by courier, but by direct edict from Lord Gwyn himself. The parchment was thick and heavy, sealed with the silver crest of the Sunlight Covenant, but the ink was an anomaly. It was still wet, fresh as a wound. This should have been impossible after centuries, yet there it lay, mocking the laws of time. The text was terse, brutal in its simplicity. The abyss rises anew beneath Ulakile. The 4 knights must act. The abyss will not cross a knight's will. This phrase, repeated thrice in the margins, became a refrain I would soon come to understand as both prayer and curse. The call to arms was clear. Artorias, the greatest of the 4, was ordered to descend into the darkness and contain the spreading corruption. Alongside him were the loyal knights, sworn to uphold the light. The archives contain meticulous logs of preparations, the forging of new blades, the blessing of armor in the sacred forges, the careful balancing of rations and weapons, every detail recorded with military precision, grounding the tale in stark reality. Yet even these official records carry undercurrents of dread. A footnote, barely legible, warns, "The abyss tests the resolve of men. The light within may yet falter." Artorias's personal journals, included here in fragments, reveal the knight's solemn resolve. His writing is measured, yet hints at a growing unease. He speaks of the abyss not as an enemy to be slain, but a presence to be endured. The chronicler notes a peculiar detail in these entries. A mention of a sink with a companion, though no name is given. The phrase appears once more. "The abyss will not cross a knight's will." Repeated, ritualistic, almost a mantra. The departure is described with reverence. The knights rode beneath a sky smothered in ash-grey clouds, a bitter wind cutting like a blade. The air was thick with the scent of burning resin, and something else, something fetid and ancient. Before leaving, Artorias is recorded as performing a silent benediction over his great sword, a ritual unknown even to the court clergy. The scribe's hand falters at this point, the ink blurring as though resisting further recording. As the knights departed, the chronicler's notes describe the last sound in the city, a distant, mournful howl that cut through the gale, fading into the void. The final notation of the chapter is a stark warning. The abyss will not cross a knight's will. But what if the will falters? As I finish this record, the candles flicker violently, and the scent of damp earth rises anew. The growl from the shadows is no longer a whisper, but a presence pressing against the edges of this chamber. I cannot yet say if it is friend or foe. The journey to the abyss was not a march of glory, but a descent into something older than kingdoms, older than the age of fire itself. Artorias rode first, his great sword sheathed yet ever present at his side, silver armor dulled by the ash that clung to the air. Behind him, a retinue of loyal knights followed, their footsteps heavy, uncertain. The shadows around them twisted and shifted, distorting the edges of sight. The chronicler's report focuses on environmental details. The oppressive humidity that slicked the inside of helmets, the bitter metallic tang in the air that tasted like rust and old blood, the unnatural silence, punctuated only by the distant drip of water, echoing like hollow thunder. Torchlight struggled to pierce the thick darkness, the flames sputtering as if the very air resisted their glow. The logs speak of a coldness that crept not from temperature, but from some unseen void. A chill in the marrow, a frost biting at the soul. The earth beneath their boots was soft, unnatural, like walking on rotted flesh rather than soil. Scouts sent ahead reported faint tracks, neither fully animal nor wholly human, arranged in impossible geometries that twisted and folded back on themselves. Suddenly, a scout's voice cut through the silence. Movement! Something stalking the perimeter. The knights formed tight formations. Shield walls locked, spears pointed outward. Artorias' voice rang out, calm but heavy. Hold the line. The abyss tests our resolve. Steady. The report's rhythm shifts here, from the steady cadence of marching to the erratic breath of combat. A soldier's hand was noted to have calcified mid-step, the skin turning brittle and bone-white, yet still clutching his spear. This detail was marked with asterisks, a sign of extraordinary anomaly. Artorias struck with precise, brutal efficiency, each swing of his great sword cleaving shadow and sinew alike. The chronicler's notes describe the knight's movements as fluid, unnatural, as though guided by a will beyond his own. The strange geometries in the landscape began to affect sound. Echoes arrived before the source, footsteps repeated themselves out of sequence, and the knight's own voices sometimes returned distorted, warped and slow. One entry records a sudden loss of radio contact with the rear guard, replaced by static that mimicked faint wolf howls, howls that bore an uncanny intelligence. The knights pushed forward, deeper into the hollow. A chasm that seemed to breathe, inhale, and exhale in a slow, cruel rhythm. The abyssal blackness was alive, pressing in with the weight of infinite hunger. Suddenly, a scout called out, "I see something. Something following us. But when I turn, there is nothing." The report ends abruptly with a note. Scouts' psyches fracturing, visual hallucinations reported, command orders withdrawal. But Artorias would not retreat. His own journal entry, scratched hastily into the margins, reads, "I must face the darkness alone. The abyss will not cross a knight's will." The last lines describe the knight descending alone into the black maw, the silence swallowing the clatter of armor, and the faintest whisper of a growl trailing behind. As I set down this record, a shiver runs down my spine. The scent of damp earth is now pervasive, not distant, but thick in this very chamber. And that growl, low and resonant, presses just beyond the edge of hearing. I know this tale is only beginning. The descent beneath Ulakail was no mere journey into darkness. It was a passage into an ancient void, where time frayed and reality bent like molten glass. Artorias' own words in his final report are fragmented, as if torn from the edge of comprehension. I encountered the source, Manus, the primeval man. No form known to men could contain such darkness. Manus is described only in shattered glimpses, a monstrous hand too large to be human, fingers twisting and elongating as if shaped from living shadow. Its voice is said to reverberate through the mind like fractured memories, a cacophony of sorrow, rage, and forgotten pain. Surrounding Manus were the remnants of Ula Kyle's sorcerers, their bodies hollowed and whispering backwards, their shadows peeled away like tattered cloaks. They chanted in a tongue older than kingdoms, a liturgy that warped the air and twisted light itself. The laws of nature unraveled here. Gravity fluctuated without warning. Time dilated and contracted between heartbeats, and the abyssal blackness was no longer absence, but presence, a living, breathing entity pressing against Artorias' mind and flesh. One knight's body began to dissolve into a fog of sinew and bone, only to reassemble moments later in a grotesque parody of life. This detail is carefully annotated in the military log, alongside diagrams of anatomical distortion. Sound itself became unreliable. The echoes of footsteps sometimes arrived before the steps, and the cries of the sorcerers twisted into unrecognizable tones that set the teeth on edge. Artorias' own great sword, once a shining beacon, absorbed the darkness, its blade now matte black, cold to the touch and humming with a terrible resonance. The chronicler's notes falter here. The ink smudged and the text torn. It reads, "The abyss tests not only flesh but will." The knight falters. The last lines end mid-sentence, the script dissolving as though the abyss itself is consuming the words. As I transcribe this fragment, the faintest pressure presses at the back of my skull. A whispering shadow urging silence. Yet I must record, for the abyss remembers all. The abyss is a corrupter not only of flesh and mind, but of trust itself. Artorias' mission, once clear and resolute, began to fracture under the weight of shadow. The sacred covenant he swore to uphold splintered like brittle glass. The chronicles tell of a whispered betrayal, not of malice, but of desperation. His fellow knights, those sworn brothers in arms, began to doubt. Doubt twisted into fear, and fear bred suspicion. Communications faltered, command orders blurred and contradicted. The bond between Artorias and Sif, his wolf companion and living talisman, strained under invisible pressure. One log entry details a moment where Artorias, isolated in a stifling hollow, found Sif growling not at some unseen foe, but at him. The wolf's eyes glinted with something not quite natural, a reflection of the abyss's hunger. The knight's journal grows darker here. The abyss whispers lies. It festers beneath skin and spirit alike. I no longer know friend from foe, man from shadow. The military logs record strange incidents, troops turning on one another, weapons discharged into empty space, shadows lengthening and writhing against the flicker of torchlight. One patrol vanished entirely, their last radio transmission fragmented into an unintelligible litany of numbers and sacred phrases. 42, 84, the covenant breaks. The numbers appear repeatedly in the margins, a haunting motif echoing the ritualistic language that threads through this tale. Despite the unraveling, Artorias pressed forward. His resolve hardened, but cracks showed in his voice. Now a brittle litany repeated like a prayer against the dark. The abyss will not cross a knight's will. Yet, what if the will itself is the gateway? The chapter ends on a chilling note. A transmission abruptly cuts off, leaving only static. And beneath it, a single, low growl that chills the marrow. As I close this volume, the chamber grows colder, and the faint scent of damp earth clings to the air. The shadowed growl is no longer distant, but echoes from the walls themselves. The abyss is not just outside, it is here, with me. The mind is a fortress, but even the strongest walls can crumble beneath relentless assault. Artorias' journal becomes a ledger of fractured thoughts and desperate pleas, the words scrawled with growing desperation and trembling hand. The abyss seeps into the cracks between memory and nightmare. Faces shift, friend, foe, shadow, indistinguishable. The chronicler's annotations grow sparse, as if the scribes themselves feared to linger over these passages. Reports describe the night's hallucinations, glimpses of phantom shapes stalking just beyond sight, whispers curling through the air like smoke, voices calling his name from the void. The very air thickens with an almost tangible dread, a suffocating pressure that warps perception. Time dilates and contracts unpredictably. Seconds stretch into eternities, only to snap back in cruel bursts. One entry records Artorias clutching his head, murmuring an ancient litany meant to ward off spirits. In the name of the lords of sunlight, I bind thee, shadow. But the words fall hollow, swallowed by an encroaching silence that no prayer can breach. The wolf, Sif, remains at his side. Or does it? The chronicler's notes grow cryptic here, hinting at the wolf's form, flickering between solid and ethereal. A guardian tethered tenuously between realms. The phrase, repeated like a dirge, returns. The abyss will not cross a knight's will. Yet the will is fractured, fragmented by doubt and fear. In a final entry, Artorias writes, "If the self is shattered, what remains to hold the abyss at bay?" The chapter closes with a chilling report. The knight's voice recorded over a failing comlink, speaking in fragmented phrases, broken by static, a plea, or perhaps a warning. As I finish this record, the air chills sharply, and the growl rises once again, closer now, reverberating through the very stones. I sense the abyss watching, waiting for the final fracture. The moment of reckoning was not marked by a clash of blades, but by a silence deeper than any grave. Artorias, battered in mind and body, stood at the edge of the abyss, a swirling maw of darkness that pulsed with malevolent life. It was no mere void, but a sentient hunger, ancient and patient beyond imagining. The chronicles describe the knight's final stand as a ritual of will, a desperate litanies recited against the tide of shadow. By blade and by oath I bind thee, abyssal shade. You shall not claim this soul. Yet the darkness answered not with sound, but with cold that seeped into bone and sinew, a creeping frost that froze even courage itself. The great sword, once gleaming with holy light, now drank in the shadows, its surface etched with runes that pulsed faintly with an unholy glow. Sif, the great wolf, appeared beside Artorias, a spectral guardian whose eyes reflected the abyssal void. Their bond, once unbreakable, now strained beneath the crushing weight of corruption. The battle was not fought in flesh alone. Artorias' mind became a battlefield, torn between light and dark, sanity and oblivion. The chronicles hint at moments when the knight glimpsed his own shadow, a twisted mockery that moved with a will of its own. One fragment of the record describes a whispered conversation, a bargaining with the abyss itself. What will you offer, knight? Your soul? Your memories, or the fate of all you hold dear? The answer is lost, swallowed by the void. The chronicles end abruptly, the final pages torn or consumed by the blackness that infected the archive. Yet a single line remains, scrawled in a trembling hand. The abyss embraces, and the night is no longer alone. As I close this volume, the scent of damp earth is overpowering, and that low growl now thrums like a heartbeat beneath the stones. The darkness watches still. The abyssal embrace did not end with battle. It lingered, a stain woven deep into the sinew of knight and beast alike. Artorias' return was not triumphant, but hollow. His armor bore marks not of simple war, but of something else, something corrosive and alien. Where once his visage held the calm resolve of a warrior, now a haunted shadow clung beneath his helm. The chronicler's words weigh heavy, describing flesh that seemed to writhe beneath the surface, veins darkened as if carrying the very essence of the abyss. His movements grew erratic, his gaze flickering between the present and distant nightmares no mortal should endure. The great wolf, Sif, too was changed, his once vibrant form now gaunt, eyes dimmed yet fiercely protective. The bond between knight and wolf, once a symbol of unity and strength, had become a fragile tether holding at the edge of dissolution. Reports from the court clergy speak of whispered litanies against the creeping shadow, rituals to cleanse, but never fully erase the corruption. The words, repeated with fervor, carried a desperate hope. Let the light of the lords of sunlight purify the darkness within. But the darkness within was patient, and it resisted. Strange phenomena plagued the knight's company. Armor inexplicably chilled to the touch, shadows moving contrary to light, faint howls echoing where no beast should be. Soldiers reported fleeting glimpses of figures at the edge of vision, twisting into shapes both familiar and grotesque. The chronicler notes with clinical detachment the gradual breakdown of Artorias' comrades, their minds unraveling as they grappled with unseen forces. Madness crept quietly, a shadow in the corner of the soul. One particularly harrowing account tells of a priest who, upon blessing Artorias' sword, screamed as the blade pulsed with a living darkness, as if aware and hungry. The chapter closes with a grim report. Artorias vanished during a patrol, leaving only a whisper in the void, a lingering scent of damp earth and fur. And beneath it all, the ever-present growl, a reminder that the corruption unseen is the most insidious of all. The final reports from the lost expedition are fragmentary, shattered echoes of a battle that defies mortal comprehension. Artorias, the Abysswalker, stood alone against a tide of darkness that threatened to drown all light. His armor, blackened and warped by the abyss's touch, gleamed faintly in the flickering torchlight. The chronicles describe his movements with a mixture of awe and dread, a tempest of grace and fury, each strike cleaving shadow and sinew alike. The great sword sang a dirge as it met the unnatural forms that surged from the abyssal depths. But this was no ordinary battle. The darkness bent the very laws of physics. Wounds closed and reopened, time folded upon itself, and screams echoed backward through the void. Companions who witnessed the fight spoke of moments when Artorias seemed to fade, becoming less flesh and more shadow, a living extension of the abyss itself. One soldier's journal, recovered from the wreckage, recounts, he fought like a man possessed, but not by rage, by something far older, far darker. His eyes held the abyss, and it looked back, The tide of darkness was relentless. Figures emerged from the blackness, twisted parodies of the lost knights and sorcerers of Ulatil, their forms fractured and broken, howling silent laments. Artorias' bond with Sif remained his last anchor. The wolf's spectral form circled him, fierce and unwavering, a beacon in the crushing gloom. As the battle wore on, the knight's journal entries grew more erratic, interspersed with fragments of ancient prayers and cryptic warnings. The abyss calls to the lost. The covenant shatters with every breath. Only the will can hold the dark. The final entry is a desperate plea, a record of a choice made in the shadow of oblivion. If I fall, the abyss must not claim all. I am the shield against the night, even if I must become the darkness to do so. The archives end here. What happened next is lost to time, swallowed by the very darkness Artorias fought to contain. Yet the echoes remain, whispered warnings, faint growls in the shadows, and a lingering scent of damp earth and wolf fur. The war was over, or so it seemed. The Abysswalker's sacrifice left a silence that settled like ash over Ulatil. The catacombs lay sealed, the darkness confined. Yet no one dared claim victory. The chronicles tell of a city both ruined and preserved, caught in an eternal twilight, where shadows dance on the edge of perception. The surviving knights and sorcerers were few, their minds fractured by what they had witnessed. The scent of damp earth lingered like a wound that would not heal, mingling with the faint howls that echoed through the silent streets. Artifacts recovered from the ruins carried dark traces, weapons that whispered secrets in forgotten tongues, armor that seemed to pulse with a heartbeat of its own. The court clergy deemed many relics too tainted for holy rites, consigning them to fire or the deepest vaults beneath Anor Londo. Yet even in exile, the corruption festered. Invisible, insidious, reports spoke of strange phenomena. Shadows that moved against the light, whispers in empty halls, and fleeting glimpses of a knight in black armor, wielding a great sword that drank the sun itself. Artorias had become a myth, a warning and a beacon. Some spoke of him as a fallen hero, others as a cursed wraith condemned to wander the abyss forever. The chronicler's final notes caution that the line between salvation and damnation is razor thin. The abyss, they write, does not simply consume, it transforms, reshapes the soul in its terrible image. The last passage ends with a ritual verse, repeated by those who still remember the tale. In darkness we find our truth. In shadow we meet our fate. The abyss is eternal, and so is the watcher at its gate. As I place this manuscript in the sealed archive, a chill wind stirs the candles, and from the shadows comes that familiar growl, low, eternal, and patient. The darkness remains. The abyss does not sleep, neither does its guardian. In the years following the fall of Ulatil, legends grew in the flickering light of hearths and the whispered prayers of those who dared remember. Artorias, the Abysswalker, became a figure caught between myth and memory, a sentinel condemned to an eternal watch. The archives contain fragmented reports from wayfarers and lost souls who claim to have glimpsed the night on the edge of shadow and flame, standing vigil where no mortal should tread. His armor, scarred and darkened, glints faintly in the gloom, and his great sword hangs heavy, an eternal barrier between light and oblivion. Yet the chronicler's notes warn that this vigil is no longer one of heroism, but of suffering. Artorias is said to be bound to the abyss by a fate crueler than death. A guardian trapped in endless conflict, his will eroding beneath the weight of the darkness he swore to contain. Whispers speak of nights when the growls rise, not from distant shadows, but from within the heart of the night himself, a tortured sound that merges man and monster. The line between savior and curse blurs as the Watcher becomes a thing of shadow, his humanity dissolving into the very darkness he guards against. Yet despite this, the abyss does not breach the threshold. The night's will, fractured but unbroken, holds fast, a final bulwark against oblivion. The chronicler closes with a grim meditation. In eternal vigil, there is no rest, only endless watching. The Abysswalker remains, neither alive nor dead, the last line against the endless night. As I seal this manuscript, the chill in the chamber deepens, and from the shadows comes that familiar growl, patient, eternal, unyielding. The watch continues. The tale of Artorias does not end with his vigil, but in the echoes that ripple through the ages. The shadow he bore, both burden and blessing, left a mark upon the world, far beyond the abyss's edge. Survivors of Ulakail whispered of lingering curses, blades tainted with abyssal resonance, warriors haunted by unseen terrors, and lands forever scarred by the twilight of the fallen kingdom. The archives detail relics recovered long after the conflict, weapons that hum with a dark pulse, armor etched with symbols of forgotten rites, and fragments of a shattered covenant whispered in forbidden liturgies. Many who came into contact with these artifacts found themselves changed, eyes flickering with unnatural light, dreams invaded by endless darkness, wills bending like reeds in a storm. The chronicler's notes reveal a chilling truth. The abyss is a contagion, slow and insidious, infecting body and soul alike. And from this corruption, new legends arose. Knights bearing the mark of the Abysswalker. Warriors whose souls teetered on the brink between salvation and damnation. The final pages of this volume carry a warning. Beware the Shadow's legacy. It is a chain unbroken, a darkness passed from hand to hand, waiting for the night to reclaim all. As I close this manuscript, the familiar growl echoes once more, a reminder that the legacy is not merely history, but a living, breathing terror still watching from the darkness. The Shadow endures. In the end, there is no victory, only the endless watch. Artorias, once the noble knight of the Four, has become something else entirely. Neither man nor shadow, he stands sentinel at the threshold between light and oblivion, a figure carved from despair and determination. The chronicles end with the image of the Abysswalker, his great sword plunged deep into the cold earth, standing resolute against a darkness that knows no rest or mercy. His armor, blackened and cracked, seems to pulse faintly with an unholy light, a beacon and a warning. Around him, the air hums with the same dreadful resonance that once echoed beneath Ulakail, a sound felt more than heard, a low, guttural growl that vibrates through bone and soul alike. The scribe's notes reflect on the paradox of Artorias' fate, a hero cursed to contain the very evil he once sought to destroy. He is both shield and sword, prisoner and warden, the last line drawn in the endless war against the abyss. But the darkness is patient. It waits beyond the gate, eternal and hungry, and so does the Watcher. The final passage in the archive is a liturgical lament, a chant for those who stand forever on the precipice. By blade and by shadow, the Watcher endures. The gate remains closed, but the price is eternal. As I set down this last record, the chamber grows deathly silent. The familiar growl ceases, replaced by a heavy stillness, as if the darkness itself holds its breath. Then, faint and distant, a whisper, a reminder that the abyss is never truly contained.